Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Break Big Biomass National Call to Action. My name is Adam Collette. I'm the program director at Dogwood Alliance, and I'm so happy for all of you to join this evening. We have an amazing event coming up. People are still joining, so we're kind of giving folks a couple minutes to come on board, but we have an amazing event. We have an incredible group of speakers. And we're going to tonight expose the truth about the big biomass industry and call to action on this incredibly important issue facing our country today. So again, thank you for being here. I first want to start before we get in. I just want to thank all the organizations, our speakers tonight, the panelists, all the back end folks, that from the email to the marketing, to the organizations that hosted this event for making it possible. This has been in the works for some time. We actually planned on having this event last October, but when Hurricane Helene hit the Asheville area, a lot of our capacity to be able to pull this off was delayed. And so we're so excited to host the event today on World Health Day, April 7th, the Break Big Biomass National Call to Action. Just a quick thanks to the organizations who are hosting and putting this event on: Dogwood Alliance, the Environmental Paper Network, Greater Greener Gloucester, Pivot Point, Rachel Carson Council, Stand.Earth, the Climate Communications Coalition, 350 Eugene, and 350 Portland, amongst several other organizations who had a large part in making it happen. So again, thank you. We are just a quick overview of what to expect today and what we're gonna see. We have about an hour and a half for this webinar. We'll see how long we take with the question and answers, but we're roughly going to run about an hour and a half. We're going to start with some biomass basics and give an overview of the industry and the impacts that we're talking about tonight. We're going to go into a really incredible community voices panel, hearing community concerns of folks who are living on the front line of this industry or fighting to stop the industry from coming into their community. And then we're going to have an expert speak about the pollution and public health impacts of this industry. Unfortunately, I do have to announce that Dr. Erica Walker from Brown University had an emergency and couldn't be here tonight. So she was really bummed to not be able to attend, but unfortunately she's had an emergency and can't be here. But we still have a expert to talk about the pollution and health impacts, and then we'll have a clear call to action. And that is one exciting part about the agenda today, that we're going to have a strong call to action right at the end. And we have all kinds of resources and tools for folks who are attending to take action in your community and your state, your region, or even a national level. So stay tuned for that. I think that's it. So I'm gonna share my screen here and start with a presentation on biomass basics. All right. Oh wait, let me do one thing. I'm going to stop sharing just for a second and reshare. I apologize. Oh, and one note, we're going to share like this so folks can see me talk. One note, with the questions, I forgot to make that. You can put questions in the chat. They won't be visible, but questions that we answer. And we'll also be tagging a bunch of questions for the question and answer period. So again, welcome to the Break Big Biomass National Call to Action. My name is Adam Collette. I'm with Dogwood Alliance. So what is biomass? At the biggest, broadest term, biomass is really organic matter in an area. But when we're talking about biomass being organic matter, mainly trees and forests, which are used as fuel to generate electricity. And so when we talk about biomass, and we're talking about biomass today, we're talking about the trees and forests that are burned to generate electricity. And so just really focusing in on that forest biomass, that's kind of the frame in which we're discussing today. And so you think about that as maybe you think about burning a wood stove or a pellet grill. We are not talking about those types of bioenergy. We're talking about industrial scale, large bioenergy facilities, burning wood at an industrial level. This is what the kind of industrial modern biomass energy industry looks like. On the top left there, you have the Drax power plant, one of the world's largest biomass burning facilities. On the bottom right, you have a wood pellet facility in North Carolina, chewing up about a million tons of wood every year to make wood pellets. The clear cuts that you see, that is where they're sourcing this wood from. And so when we talk about biomass, we're talking about major industrial activities that are logging forests, that are chopping them up, that are shipping them overseas, and are burning them to create energy. I've highlighted here three of the main companies that are part of the biomass industry. Drax, which is a UK-based company. They also have significant operations across the US. Inviva, who's the world's largest wood pellet producer, operations all across the US South. And then Fram Renewable Fuels, which is another really large wood pellet producer, primarily in the state of Georgia. And so we've got major companies operating across the US and Europe, and even in Asia, and we've got a major industry. The impacts of biomass. So when we think about renewable energy, unfortunately, biomass is still kind of considered clean and renewable energy. And 60% of renewable energy in Europe comes from biomass, and it's receiving hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies that are meant to address climate change. So a huge percentage of the renewable energy used internationally, primarily in Europe, is actually coming from forests here in the United States. The US is the world's largest exporter of wood pellet biomass. We export more wood pellets across to both markets in Europe and Asia than anywhere else in the world. Over 1 million acres of US forests have been clear cut and burned for biomass. And these wood pellet facilities, and we're going to hear a lot about this today, are twice as likely to be placed within environmental justice communities. Per unit of energy created, biomass emits over 2 times as much carbon as burning coal. So we're emitting more carbon than burning coal because it takes so much more wood to produce the same amount of energy. And also, the manufacturing of these wood pellets, which we will hear firsthand experiences of today, they release harmful pollutants and particulate matter that impact cardiovascular systems, increasing health issues, emergency room visits for vulnerable citizens. So we really have to ask ourselves at the end of the day, these pictures really represent the biomass supply chain. And this is an important point that I want to make to everybody. We are taking trees from forests, from natural forests here in the US. We are clear cutting those forests, putting them on trucks, shipping them to an industrial wood pellet facility, grinding them up in an incredibly toxic process that's polluting communities, air, and water, then putting them on trucks and shipping them to a port. Then at that port, we're putting them on huge ships and shipping them across the ocean to either Europe or Asia. And then they land at a port in Japan or in the UK. They get on a train or another truck. They're shipped from there all the way over to a power station, and then they're burned. And that is a supposed solution to climate change. That's supposedly a form of clean energy. And how is this possible? How is this actually make sense that this is a solution that we're realistically putting out there, and we're funneling millions and millions of dollars into making happen? Well, at a root of a lot of that, it is really about how we value nature and how we value our forests right now. Right now, we are only valuing our forests more when they're worth logged than when they are standing. And And these pictures here are often what is billed as sustainable forest management. And we really need to be very, very cautious around how we are using those words of sustainable forest management. Let me give you an example. This clear cut that you see on the bottom left, that's a clear cut that was photographed. I photographed that. If we just leave that there, or even if we replant, but if that's just left alone, right there, that mature natural forest was clear cut and left alone right along a river, that is still considered forest land. On paper, we still count that as a forest. We still count that as a forest. And what we have done is we have really, through either the way we account for carbon, also in this clear cut, the carbon that was emitted from logging it and creating the wood products, often biomass out of forests like that, we don't count that carbon because it's still considered forest land. And so we've effectively, through policy and through definitions, we've hidden the impacts of industrial logging. And because of that, on paper, a supply chain and an industry like this in biomass makes sense to people, but it doesn't make sense in the context of our forests, in the context of our climate, and especially in the context of our communities. The last slide I want to just show on this, because the situation that this has caused. In the red there, you see now I'm with Dogwood Alliance. Our focus is the southern United States, so this is focused on this. We have representatives from California and the West Coast, and I know we have a lot of West Coast people on the call today. So thank you all for being here. But this graph is focused on the U.S. South, which is one of the world's largest wood-producing regions. But you think about what are the major causes of trees being cut down, and we'll often think about maybe fire or insects or even development being logged for a parking lot. But really, the red, that is logging and forestry. Logging accounts for more tree cover loss, nearly 5 times that of all those other reasons combined. And yet we have effectively hidden a lot of the impacts of logging in our policy and in our definitions. So therefore, an industry like biomass could make sense. And that's how we've ended up with the situation today. But right now is a really important time. We've got the current administration rolling back forest protections across our national forest, which is impacting us here in the South, as well as everybody out on the West Coast and your large amount of national forests out there. We've got the Drax, one of the major industry players, introducing a Climate Week, a plan to massively expand their carbon renewal projects and invest in 20 new biomass facilities across the country and expand from the West Coast to the US South. And so this industry is eyeing expansion, and we have an administration in office right now which is really trying to open up the gates to logging and an increase in logging across our country. And so this is why we're here today. Now is the time for action. Now is the time to educate yourself about this industry, reach out, take action, contact your elected officials. The industry is, we've been campaigning against this industry for years. It is also back on its heels. And so now is the time for action. Thank you all. That's my presentation. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Miss Heidi Cody to moderate our community panel. So welcome, Heidi. Thanks for being here.
Hello. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Adam and Dogwood Alliance, for organizing this wonderful event. I'm really happy to be with you here tonight. My name is Heidi Cody. I live in Vancouver, Washington, which is southwestern Washington, right next to Portland, Oregon, if that helps you locate me geographically. And here in Washington State, we have 2 biomass facilities proposed as part of the biomass industry's effort to expand onto the West Coast, which includes Washington, Oregon, and California proposals for these plants. And by way of introduction, I am the coalition manager for an alliance called Alliance for Community Engagement, call ourselves ACE for short. And we are a coalition of 12 environmental and environmental justice groups that have been tracking this biomass expansion effort in Southwest Washington. We're very concerned about what this means for community health impacts, loss of trees, air pollution, all that stuff. And I'm very excited to be moderating the panel of our community voices tonight. I do want to share a couple slides very quickly. I am excited to share that the coalition has been working on biomass, have a new website that just launched. I'll do that in a second. I'll put the website in the chat, but it's called nobigBiomassPNW.org, and it's an effort to share out in the West Coast area, Pacific Northwest specifically, about the biomass expansion effort and try to stop it. So these are just some screenshots from the website. And for clarity, there are two separate biomass proposals in Southwest Washington that I and others that I work with are very concerned about. One of them is Drax in Longview, which is about an hour north of me, and already has a ton of air pollution due to extractive industries, a long history of fossil fuel terminal fights and extractive industry going on that causes a lot of air pollution already. So adding Drax in would not be good. And the other one is in a town called Hoquiam. And that company is Pacific Northwest Renewable Energy. And so those are the projects we're trying to stop. And before I segue to the panelists, we have a rallying cry, which is hit the road, Drax, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more. Hit the road, Drax, and don't you come back no more. So fortunately for us, Drax and Jack work together pretty well. I'll stop sharing. And I'd like to ask the panelists that I am going to be speaking with to come on screen so we can see who you are. They are Dr. Crystal Martin, Dr. Treva Gear, Portia Shepard, and Gloria Alonso Cruz. Thank you so much for joining me. So the way this is going to work is there are 4 questions. And the order is going to be Dr. Crystal Martin, then Dr. Treva Gear, then Portia Shepard, and Gloria Alonso Cruz. And as I ask you each question, I will ask you to introduce yourselves briefly, and then you can start answering the question. Then we'll do a little round robin. So you'll introduce yourselves at different times. So with that said, Dr. Crystal Martin, would you please introduce yourself to us?
Well, hello, I share that same sentiment with you, Heidi. Hit the road, Drax, and don't you come back. That's the song we need to be singing in my community. Hit the road, and don't you come back no more.
It's free to use.
If I could sing, I would really sing. But I am Crystal Martin, and I am from Gloucester, Mississippi. I serve as a community activist and advocate, basically fighting Drax. I worked as an educator for nearly 30 years in higher education. And about 5 years ago, I learned about the harmful health impacts that my also discovered a lot of people in my community were having a lot of impacts. So guess what? I showed up so I could tell Drax, you got to hit the road, Drax, and don't you come back. And that's who I am. I'm from Gloucester, Mississippi.
Well, Crystal, I have the question for you is, how has the biomass industry impacted you and your community?
Well, y'all can tell it has definitely impacted me and my community. That's why we sing and hit the road, Drax. But the arrival of the biomass industry in Gloucester has come with a lot of concerns from the residents of Gloucester. We're a small rural community. We are located in Southwest Mississippi. We're a really, really small community, less than 1,000 residents. Approximately 80% of my community are a community Black. They look unique. And because we are a relatively small, live less than 1 to 2 miles away from the Drax plant. In Gloucester, Drax sits in the heart of our community. It's in the center of our community. The people in Gloucester face a lot of serious public health risk from breathing those toxic pollutions that we heard Adam talk earlier.
Mhm.
These include particulate matter. We have hazardous air pollutants, VOCs, the volatile organic compound, and that nasty, dirty sawdust that we all inhale. I'm trying to recover now from inhaling a little too much of it. But we also experience a lot of noise from DRACs. They operate 12 hours, and all day and all night we experience noise pollution as well. Uh,
Can you
Many of us
describe
suffer
what the noise
from
pollution is like? Can you describe, is it
late
you
at
hear?
night, we look, we record videos late at night. You could hear the clanging and thumping of the mill working, just clank,
Mhm.
clank, clank, clank. And yeah, my mom have a lot of videos because it keeps her up. So midnight, 1 o'clock, we have videos, in the midnight, all people get up and can hear is the clank, clank, clank,
Yeah,
clank. Yeah,
makes it hard to
cause
sleep.
mental health issues. But many people suffer from significant health issues that include the respiratory issues. It's ongoing, chronic, nonstop. We face high rates of asthma, COPD. People have lung disease. I've heard some people talk about being diagnosed with black lungs. We have high rates of cancer and then chronic bronchitis. Another thing about DRAX is there's no economic investment in our community. I think about when DRAX showed up to a small community like mine, no doubt they talked about the hope of getting a job because in the past we did have an industry there and a lot of people in our community worked in that industry. They had really good jobs, they made a living. So DRAX no doubt showed up with the hope of offering jobs to the residents. But a lot of the people that look like me, remember my community, look like me.
Mhm.
And a lot of people who were hired got a job through the temporary service, which means they only made a fraction of what DRAC said they were going to be paying these employees. And then I've also learned that there are a few other people that work there, but they clean up the facility. The only other investment that I've seen is Drax does give out turkeys. They're gonna make sure they show up in the community and give away turkeys during
One good
Thanksgiving.
thing.
And then I've seen where they invest in parties. The people in the community, it's a small community, so people have parties, and you'll see a Drax table. And then they invest in the parades. I have seen their floats in the parade and that paint they bought. They purchased some paint and did they purchased paint and then it's spray paint at that. And they call that beautification for the town of Gloucester. They painted the flower pots on Main Street, Gloucester, with some blue paint and put some $1 flowers, artificial flowers, and they call that a beautification project. So now, one other thing I'm gonna share right fast is the air quality because it's getting worse. The air quality has gotten worse over time. Now we're seeing a lot of smoke settling right in front of our front doors. 1 minute you'll see smoke in the air, and then the next minute you'll see it just sit right at the front door. So we have to deal with that smoke and then the smell. Um, Sometimes to me it smells like pine tar or something. I don't know. But anyway, we have a smell, an odor in our community. And we have a lot of neighbors and people who are reporting issues just from that smell and that smoke. So dust and noise from the logging has definitely disrupted the peace that we used to have in our
Right.
little small town of Gloucester.
Yeah. Well,
And that's what I'll share.
thank you so much for sharing. I want to give some other panelists a chance to answer this question. I'd like to switch over to Dr. Treva Gear. Would you like to quickly introduce yourself and answer this question? And the question is, again, how has the biomass industry impacted your community?
All right. Well, I'm glad to be here with you. I'm Dr. Treva Gear. I'm the chair and founder of the Concerned Citizens of Cook County. I also the Georgia State Manager for Dogwood Alliance. And I have 17 years of education. I'm an Army veteran, community activist, and I'm proud to be in this work. I will tell you that I came to this work about 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago. Because when you asked the question about how it impacted my community, where there were 2 wood pellet plants coming, first there was 1 wood pellet plant. And what was quite interesting is that the individual, we didn't know that it was coming, because I figure if something's great, why aren't you putting it in the paper? But it wasn't in the paper. We happened to be having a community meeting during COVID on Zoom, and somebody said, there's a wood pellet plant coming and it's going to provide a lot of jobs. And I said, I don't think so. I don't think that's a good thing. Let us call some of our environmental friends, which we don't have very many, because I forgot to mention we're in deep South Georgia. I'm based in Valdosta. My hometown is Ado, Georgia, which is about 24 miles north of here. But there are not many environmental groups, if any. So we got in touch with a Riverkeeper group, Walls, and then they said, oh no. So we got connected to Dogwood Alliance, and so began the fight. And now before I was a Dogwood Alliance family member. So there was the first plant. And what was interesting is in a Georgia Trend article, the plant manager said, because you also have these smaller entities, this was not a Drax or a Fram or any of these little small plants that pop up in any other place, because they are growing across the state of Georgia. And they said that they were going to provide 100 jobs. Well, in the reality of it, it ended up probably being it would be about 25. They're not here. They did not come. However, we pushed back and we fought early, but it would be close to our community. And the thing they stated is that Ado was an ideal location for the plant. And I was like, he doesn't know anything about our people. So it was ideal because it was a community that had a high level of poverty, high amount of people of color, and it was ideal. That's what made it the perfect community. And so we began to fight, and we joined with Dogwood. We petitioned our local officials, everything. We did all those things early on to stop the plant. And then it got permitted anyway. We put up billboards, things like that. And then there was a second plant that decided to come. And so we never stopped fighting and never stopped educating our community. So the fight occurred in our community. We were able to give the second plant a great deal of pushback, which was more favorable to us. Still not here, which is good. And so the thing about it is that this fight goes beyond, because my work in Georgia goes beyond just my community. It extends outward to a community that I'm working in now, Lumber City, where they have a plant and they didn't know what was going on there, that their air was being poisoned. So that's the work. And there's plants expanding across the state of Georgia. Probably have 7 functioning plants now, and other sawmills deciding to turn into pellet plants as well. So the work is continuous, and that's how it impacts my community, my state as well.
Okay, thank you for sharing, Treva. Portia, would you like to answer this question and introduce yourself? Can you come on screen? Or if not, we can go to Gloria. Oh, go ahead, Portia. We can't see you though.
Okay.
I think you might be having an internet problem.
That okay? Hear me now?
Yep. You're really breaking up for some reason. Let's Gloria, why don't you go ahead and try to introduce yourself, and we'll try to circle back to you, Portia.
Yeah. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Gloria Alonso. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I work with a community-based organization called Little Manila Rising. We're based out of South Stockton. And to go back
in California, right?
Yes. Our community is in California. To get a picture of where the community is, you have to look at the Central Valley, which is at the heart of California. Stockton is the fastest growing metropolitan area in San Joaquin County. And the community has a port, which is why we're here today, because that port is the entry for the biomass industry, which is coming to our community in the form of the wood pellet industry. And so, unlike the other speakers or community representatives that have shared their stories and the negative impacts from having the industry operate in their community, Stockton has only one biomass facility that emits all of these negative pollutants into the air. But the wood pellet industry in actuality will be the first one to have a foothold in California. And so that is increasingly alarming, given that there are so many bad things going on, right? Like there is a lengthy and heavy record based on what other community advocates have experienced from the initial interaction to the ongoing operations that just allow us to understand that this industry is just bad in general. And so with that, I think I just want to make sure that we understand that even though the industry is not operating in the community, we have an organization that is trying to have this project that will eventually export up to 100 metric tons of wood pellets annually to Asian markets or overseas to produce energy. And so Stockton is being looked at as the only community where it is feasible for the industry to create an export and storage facility. Why is this alarming to South Stockton? Well, as many of the community members have shared, South Stockton, where the port sits, is predominantly BIPOC. So you look at the demographic makeup and it's mostly Latino, mostly Black, mostly Asian. And we have a huge challenge ahead of us with low climate awareness and this deep need for jobs, jobs that are within the community. And so that's why it becomes so appealing for community members to say yes to this type of industry. But at the same time, for advocates that are aware and are connected to these other networks that are fighting the biomass industry throughout the United States, it is highly alarming, right? Because we look at Stockton as part of the San Joaquin Valley, and we realize that the area is not in attainment for particulate matter 2.5 since the late 90s, or for ozone. And these are some national standards that really impact the community on an individual level because they have to deal with the effects on their health, right? As Dr. Crystal Martin was saying, some of our community members have, well, not some, a lot of them have to deal with the effects and impacts of having cardiovascular diseases, respiratory diseases. We have this one tool to add some data to my testimony or share out here. We have this one data in California called CalEnviroscreen that brings multiple data sets together to understand what really is happening on a local level as far as environmental conditions go and socio characteristics go too. And these, when you put them all together, tell us that we're facing some of the highest percentiles with particulate matter 2.5, other characteristics like the ones that I mentioned, including low birth weights and much more. And on top of that, the Asthma and Allergy Foundation last year listed Stockton as the 35th asthma capital in the United States after looking at how often individuals go to the emergency room for something related to asthma conditions,
Yeah.
right? And even
Yeah.
though we have benefited from multiple efforts, legislative efforts that try to mitigate the conditions, things are not working in
Yeah.
a favorable manner, right? And so that's
Yeah.
why we have to be on the lookout for this type of bad industry,
Yeah.
and understand from other community members like we have heard today.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I think it's a theme that whatever biomass company, whatever the company is saying they're going to do, they might not care about whether there's pre-existing pollution or health impacts already. And with that, I want to segue to Portia, and hopefully we can hear you a little bit better. Portia, could you try to introduce yourself again and answer the question, which is, how has the biomass industry impacted your community?
Hey, everybody. Can everybody hear me now?
Yes,
Great.
perfect. Thank
My
you.
name is Portia. I am the executive director of Black Girl Women Rising. We're a gender and environmental justice organization located in the beautiful city of Uniontown, Alabama, serving 7 counties in the Alabama Black Belt. 2 of those counties, which is Marengo County, Demopolis, who has Drax plant there, and then Sumter County, which Epps is in, has Inviva that's getting ready to open sometime this year. I actually just left the city council meeting in else I could not miss, so that's why I'm in my car. But that community did something that Gloria was speaking about as far as trying to do pre-study. They have they're currently doing a baseline study with Brown University Community Noise Lab, they're getting ready to do where they're currently testing and getting data. They're actually like 2 weeks in, so it literally just happened. And making sure that that community have information. So once the plant open, they will have something to go by. And the reason why that was done, and I got to shout out, to Dr. Martin and Treva and Dogwood Alliance and Rachel Carson Council and SCLC. I saw Heather was on earlier, but by providing our communities with the information. And because with that information, we're able to share that to communities, not dictating to them what they should do, but give them the resources that they need so they can make better decisions. And I'm very proud of Mayor Porter and Up City Council for taking a stand, even though Inviva provided them with an incentive. They still took a stand and say, okay, we appreciate that, but we're going to protect ourselves. As it relates to the city of Demopolis, it is great to see that community is paying attention now, and also making efforts to be able to engage Drax. With some of the problems that Dr. Martin discussed, we definitely share that with them, and let them know what the importance of community engagement, not just giving them $10,000 and thinking to an organization in town, which is great for their organization, but what about the hospital in our community? That if it closed in the city of Demopolis, 7 counties, which is about 80,000 people, will be affected by that hospital closing. What are you going to do for that? Because you know that your plant is going to cause more health problems for our community, and they're going to need those facilities for their survival. So what it looks like to me is a lot of preventative efforts to ensure that these communities in Demopolis and F do not end up like Boston, do not end up like Adel or Lumber City, but they can be able to protect themselves so they won't end up like the community that we've heard today.
Great. Well, thank you. And I just want to state the obvious. This event is really about us educating each other and learning from each other to prevent and mitigate where we can. And I'm going to segue now to question number 2, which is for Dr. Treva Gear. What efforts are you focused on right now? And how are you working on addressing these issues that we're talking about in your community?
Okay, the efforts I'm focused on right now is really consistently education, to let people know what the woody biomass plant, what the wood pellet industry does, how it can affect you, and what you really can do, which I won't go into that, but being mindful. And then with Lumber City, really sounding the alarm. It's kind of like the British are coming, but no, it's the wood pellet plant is here. The pollution is here. This is what's going on with you. When I talked to that community first to let them know, they had no idea that problems that were coming out, but they had issues like asthma. They had breathing issues. There were times they couldn't go outside. The face burning first thing in the morning, smoke, the appearance of smoke and things like that. But educating people on those things, and also giving them the opportunity to be able to record that information and how to report it and who they need to call and things of that nature. And, you know, starting a conversation. So that's really been the education piece, because before you can advocate, you have to be able to educate and know what you're advocating for. And so that's a work in progress in Lumber City. Georgia's it's the second, the second largest domestic biomass burning state in the country. And so we're number one for timber. So those plants are also expanding. So the work in Lumber City will also extend to Hazelhurst, which is next door, where the Fram company, who also has a plant in Lumber City, Hazelhurst and Baxley sitting on top of each other. So education, and let it spread like wildfire, so that we can also advocate in places like Jessup that's going to receive a biomass burner. And I call it's in the triangle. So that's a big part of the work that I'm doing now, and allowing people to learn how they can protect themselves. So that's
great. Thank you. And Gloria, Portia, or Crystal, would any of you like to answer that question too? What are your efforts in your community right now? And how are you working on addressing these issues in your communities?
I can share. I want to say to Portia, I applaud your community for standing up and saying no, even though Drax has dangled that carrot, them coins, they have dangled that coins. But I applaud your community for standing up and pushing back. And on tomorrow, everybody say tomorrow. I'm the church preacher right now. Everybody say tomorrow, April the 8th. Tomorrow, April the 8th. The Gloucester community will be standing up in Jackson, Mississippi. We have to go before the Mississippi Permit Board. Why? Because Drax has asked permission. They got the audacity to ask for permission to increase more hazardous air pollution into our community. They want to pollute at even a higher and greater rate, and they don't want to receive no penalties or no violations or no fines for the increased amount of hazardous air pollution. So I'm calling on my community. I'm calling on everybody in the state of Mississippi, anybody connected to Jackson, Mississippi. If you can get here by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, Tuesday, April the 8th, join us, because we intend to stand up, just like Portia community. We're going to stand up, we're going to rise up, and we're going to face the Mississippi Permit Board, and we're going to ask them to not issue that permit request as it is written. So Portia, we trying to be like y'all. I just need my community. I know they on here, but not only my community, I need the people in the state of Mississippi surrounding us. If you close to Jackson, show up. We intend to stand up, and we're gonna make some noise.
I love
that's
it.
what we
I love it.
focus
Thank you
on.
for your leadership and your passion. I'm sorry you have to deal with this, but it's so great to see you. Portia, would you like to add anything to this?
Yeah, the prevention education piece, our organization is prevention education, training, and advocacy. That's our wheelhouse. We don't go outside of that. So it's definitely something that we definitely push. And because of what has happened in Uniontown, Alabama, with the landfill, remember back in Kingston, Tennessee, if you don't know this story, there was a big coal ash spill back in 2008. They took that coal ash and they brought it to Uniontown, Alabama. And even though it killed so many people and got so many people sick in Tennessee, when they got to Uniontown, the magic dust hit it, and they no longer said it was toxic there, although we all know that is not the case. And so, but what did not happen is the things that are happening now in Epps, Alabama, and the things that are getting ready to happen in Memphis, Alabama. Those communities are getting the information necessary in order for them to fight those companies if they have to. But what this has done is, and this is just my belief, is because they've taken these companies, because of things like Treva, the work that she did in Adel, Georgia, seeing county commissioners provide the company with, hey, you need to put these protection mechanisms in place. And and putting that pressure on them getting percentages now that they weren't getting before in order to help save our hospital in Marengo County. Same thing in Epps, Alabama. You know, they will have what they needed. That preventative measures does happen. You see that happening in Oregon. You see that happening in Washington. They are in the space to get the information so that they can protect their community. And these efforts are working. It's slow. Yes, communities who have been harmed by these companies have not gotten their due diligence and have not gotten the support that they so desperately need. But other communities are getting it because of this work. And so that's my efforts, is to ensure that we don't, another community don't get harmed by any of the environmental efforts that is happening in that. And then the training piece is to make sure we train the next generation, not just talk about it, actually go handpick and do that. Now, we're doing it with our Wastewater for Kids program, but we're going to get ready to do some wood pellet something. I was telling Adam that we got to come up with the same way we're doing wastewater for kids in the schools in 6 counties that we serve. We need to do something for wood pellet education as well, to get into these schools so they can understand and they can be the next leaders long after we're dead and gone. So those are the plans that we have, and the advocacy piece would definitely stay there, and to ensure that the community can trust what it is that we say, and provide them with the support that they need just in case they need it.
Yep. Thank you. So advocacy, education, and leadership are the themes I'm picking up on here. What about you, Gloria? Would you like to add anything to this question of what are your efforts focused on right now?
Yeah, sure. Similarly to Dr. Triva and Portia and Dr. Martin, just focusing on education. We work with young people, so we really see value in just trying to have our young leaders understand the importance of climate awareness and how and making sure that there is like accessibility to the community to understand that those type of discussions or conversations as well. To put it in other words, we have been having educational webinars, panels, a panel similar to this one, and we're gearing up to have a screening on the documentary Burn Our Trees Becoming the New Coal, as a way to make that education accessible and appealing for community members that may not be interested in how trees are becoming the new coal. Besides that, putting a lot of putting the magnifying glass on our board commissioners, understanding that they have ultimately the sort of the final decision on saying yes to the project or not, and sending them reminders, like as public comments on why this industry is bad for the community, how unsustainable and volatile it is based on subsidies from foreign subsidies and so on and so forth. But yes, echoing education and community advocacy 100%.
Great. And that's a perfect segue to the next question, which is Portia's question. What is the most important thing people can do right now to support your efforts against biomass? How can we help you? Yeah, it's for you.
Okay. Support, how can you support efforts? Okay, that can be in different ways. All right, so we're a small organization, okay, and everybody is spread thin, everybody has their own job. Volunteering is definitely something that needs to happen. Financial support for advocates. Yes, you are passionate about your work. Advocates also have to take care of their families. So also remember that when you're reaching out to these organizations. Also be specific in what it is that you can do, and listen to the need of your community. I think the biggest thing that I think happens in advocacy work is that we have our mindset of what it is that we think is supposed to be, right? And then, but the community is also saying something totally different. And so how can we be able to bridge the gap to what the community is saying versus what needs to happen in order for us to see the results that we need to do? And in order to do that, you have to be involved. You have to let them know, like, no, they're not getting it. They don't really understand biomass. Even though I said the wood pellet business, when I say biomass, everybody's like, what's biomass? We literally just talked about it. the company. So making sure that they understand the terminology that you're talking, the language that you speak. You guys are nerds. So sometimes that's intimidating, even for our politicians, that we think should be in a leadership position that they themselves don't understand. And so for you to come into a community and be able to have a conversation with them and you're talking over them, it frightens them. And then they go straight into defense mode. And so I think that sometimes dumbing down the language and help with that, those efforts would definitely be good. That's why the same way that you would translate it into different languages, translate it to everyday language so people can really understand the importance of what it is that we're discussing. So I would love to see those efforts happen in those ways. So when I say volunteer, I want to be a little bit specific in volunteer. Yes, showing up on the Capitol step with Dr. Martin is important, but after you show up, when you're sitting at the kitchen table and you making that call, getting ready for Sunday dinner, those are conversations that you need to be bringing up. And like, oh, I can't breathe. I remember we had a cheese plant in Uniontown, Alabama. I mean, it stunk up the town. People hated to drive. They would drive fast through that, or whatever. And then but it took a lawsuit to shut the plant down. But at the same time, everybody discussed the smell. No one discussed what was happening to them. And so why it was happening to them, so they can fully understand other than it just stinks. Why is it stinking? What is happening on why we need to take the steps to get it done? And in order for you to do that, you have to step up to the plate and act. And truly, and this work is really not a dumb question. I didn't know anything about biomass before Adam reached out to us. Dr. Malcolm and the People Justice Council. I didn't know anything about biomass. I thought, because as a person on the radio, I was on there, was like, man, these jobs about to pay $30 an hour. $30 an hour in the Black Belt is a lot of money. I don't know where it is where you're from, but in the Black Belt of Alabama, that's a lot of money. So I was like, man, these are going to be a good job. He overheard one of my shows and said, no, ma'am, you're telling your people wrong. And when I learned better, my words became different. And now they understand that this is not as good as they have pretended. And so it's great to learn those things, but you have to break it down so I can understand it, so I can be able to deliver it. So if you're going to volunteer, it's okay to not know everything about the subject matter. That's what Dr. Martin is for. That's what Treva is for. That's what Gloria is for, to be that mouthpiece. They need you to stand, but you need to also know why you're standing and the reason why you're standing. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Portia. Unfortunately, we have to call time on this panel. It's been great talking with you all. And thank you so much for participating and educating us about what you've been going through. I really appreciate it. Adam, I'm going to pass it back to you. And thank you. Thank you all.
Okay. Thank you all so much. I love all the hearts and the claps. Each and every one of you inspire me so much. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We're going to move on, and we're doing the best job that we can to answer the questions that come in. Some of them, I'll let you know, are being saved for the question and answer period. So we're doing that. But I'd like to next pass it to Heather Hilliker, who's a senior attorney with Southern Environmental Law Center. I'm going to let Heather introduce herself, but she's going to give us a presentation about the pollution and health impacts from the biomass industry here on the Break Big Biomass National Call to Action webinar on World Health Day. Heather.
Thank you, Adam, and welcome everyone. As Adam said, I am a senior attorney at the Southern Environmental Law Center, and I have been working on all things forest, woody biomass, and wood pellet mills for the past 8 years, including a lot of work with the community partners that you've heard from here today and other partners that live around these wood pellet manufacturing facilities. So
Heather,
I will just, yes,
I'm
Adam.
sorry to interrupt you. Your screen, it's showing your we're not seeing the full thing. It's seeing a notes version. You might want to reshare.
Let me try that again. Thank you, Adam. All right. What about now?
That's great. There you go.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you, Adam, for that. And we'll just jump right in then to the air pollution of the woody biomass industry. If I can get it to work. There we go. So for large-scale biomass, the supply chain involves cutting down trees, drying them, compressing them into these wood pellets, and then shipping them overseas to be burned for electricity, as Adam talked about up top. So this entire supply chain emits large quantities of harmful pollutants. So first you have the harvesting. The trees are harvested and they're processed, which involves cutting, debarking, and chipping the wood. This releases volatile organic compounds and particulate matter. The wood is then dried, releasing VOCs, particulate matter, hazardous air pollutants like formaldehyde and methanol, nitrogen oxides, and GHGs. Then the wood is crushed into smaller pieces and compressed into the actual pellets themselves. And that process also releases VOCs, particulates, and hazardous air pollutants. Finally, the wood is shipped overseas and burned for electricity, which emits CO2 as well as additional harmful particulate matter and air toxics. And exposure to these pollutants can cause a lot of serious health problems, including asthma, coughing, throat irritation, bronchitis, and even premature death. So the local air pollution is one of the primary concerns among the communities that are living closest to these wood pellet facilities. And despite the fact that these pellet mills generally have air quality permits that are meant to protect the public health, pellet mills in the South, which is where my organization focuses, have a history of violating these permits. So since 2013, I've documented over 70 separate state-level enforcement actions against wood pellet mills for violating the air permit conditions. And this represents thousands of different permit violations and has amounted to over $7 million in penalties. One of the most egregious examples is Drax's pellet mill in Gloucester, Mississippi, where Dr. Martin is. In 2020, the Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality fined Drax $2.5 million for emitting 3 times the legal limit of volatile organic compounds for years. And then recently, Drax was fined again for excess emissions in Gloucester, this time for violating emissions limits for hazardous air pollutants, specifically for methanol. And state agencies, unfortunately, don't always act on these violations, which is when my organization and other organizations often step in to enforce state and federal laws. So this slide here shows a couple examples of what has been accomplished through these legal actions. So in 2 instances, federal citizen suits were filed that resulted in additional pollution controls and significant penalties against Woodville Pellets in Texas, and ultimately the complete abandonment of a planned pellet mill in the case of Active Energy Renewable Power in North Carolina. In 2 other cases, federal suits were threatened, resulting in production caps or limitations on production at an Aviva mill in South Carolina, and fees and ultimately the closure of a Jasper Pellets in South Carolina as well. And then lawsuits against the state permitting agencies have also resulted in permits being revoked, as was the case recently in Georgia, additional pollution control technologies and pollution testing requirements, as well as community benefits and dust controls. But these the air pollution and these emissions violations are just one of the many issues that the communities have concerns about that live next to these pellet mills, as you heard in the last panel. So my organization has been working with many partners, including those on the screen here. We've been hearing stories from these communities for years about what it's like to live next to these pellet mills, but we didn't have a lot of data to back it up. So this past year, SELC worked in coalition with several local and regional organizations to design a survey to collect quantitative data on the impacts of living near pellet mills. As far as we're aware, this is a first of its kind survey to measure these kind of quality of life impacts for these communities. And so the survey included 20 questions about lived experiences, quality of life impacts, economic impacts, demographics, and background health information. The survey was restricted to a 2-mile radius around the relevant pellet mills, and we used GIS technology, census information, and parcel records to identify the households within that radius for each town, and we administered the survey face-to-face. So we received a total of 312 valid responses from the 5 surveyed communities, which equates to over 10% of all households within that 2-mile radius. And the communities we surveyed were Gloucester, Mississippi, around Drax Amite, Aliceville, Alabama, around Drax Aliceville, Greenwood, South Carolina, around Inviva Greenwood, Hazen, North Carolina, around Inviva Sampson, and Garysburg, North Carolina, around Inviva Northampton. And the census data for that 2-mile radius around those pellet mills is majority Black or African American, and 70% of our respondents also identified themselves as Black or African American. So, as expected, the issues we've been hearing for years from these community members were strongly reflected in the outcome of this survey. 91% of all households living within a half a mile of the pellet mills experienced dust, traffic, or noise at least weekly. And these issues were so severe and frequent that a majority of respondents reported that they had concerns that kept them from going outside their homes. And of those who indicated those concerns, 81% of them said that the wood pellet mill is always or very often the cause of their concerns. Dust was the most commonly reported negative impact of the pellet mills. Over half of all respondents reported that they experienced dust at least weekly, and 67% of those within a half a mile of a pellet mill experienced dust daily. One respondent from Greenwood, South Carolina said, quote, "It's very noisy and stuff constantly flying in the air. It's hard for my grandkids to play outside." And dust is basically particulate matter, and it's something that you breathe in and gets into your lungs and into your body and causes severe respiratory issues. People living around the pellet mills experience constant noise that many attribute to the mill itself. They describe the noise as loud booms, grinding noises, and banging that, quote, "sounds like thunder." One respondent noted that they, quote, "changed the bedrooms in their house and moved to the back of the house so it would be less noise." And on a separate occasion, I had a nearby resident tell me that the house alarm, their home alarm, actually went off from the noise and the vibrations from the pellet mill. So in the survey, 77% of respondents living within a half a mile of the pellet mill experienced noise daily. Even at 2 miles, nearly half of all respondents experienced noise daily. Traffic associated with the pellet mills include noise, poor road conditions, and frequent roadside woody debris. Over half of all respondents experience these traffic issues at least weekly, and 67% of those living within a half a mile experience it daily. Finally, the survey also captured some background health data for the communities. First, we asked about undiagnosed health conditions or symptoms associated with pollutants emitted from pellet mills, including cough, eye irritation, nose and sinus irritation, and throat irritation. 58% of respondents reported at least one of these health conditions. Second, we asked respondents whether anyone in their household was diagnosed with one of 13 specific diseases associated with or exacerbated by pollutants emitted from pellet mills. And in 4 out of 5 of the surveyed communities, 86% of respondents reported at least one family member diagnosed with one of these diseases. And it's just, I always like to point out here that we actually believe that the survey likely underrepresents the health information from these communities. The data is self-reported, and oftentimes people are uncomfortable discussing this type of sensitive information. And the survey also couldn't account for or captured undiagnosed medical illnesses. Finally, I want to take a moment to highlight the community leaders that were instrumental to this project. Nico Brown with Organized Uplifting Resources and Strategies, Richie Harding with Gaston Youth and Northampton First, Ruby Bell with Dogwood Alliance and Impacted Communities Against Wood Pellets, and Crystal Martin with Greater Greener Gloucester. These individuals worked tirelessly to organize the survey actions in their communities, and without them, this whole project would not have been possible. And this was actually the time when I was going to turn it over to Dr. Walker, who Adam has told you is unfortunately has been unable to attend tonight, and I hope that her and her family are doing well. I did take a few minutes before we started this presentation to try to do a quick Google and look up some of the information about her study that she was going to talk to you about. And so I'm just going to read some quick information about that study, and hopefully we can get more information out to everybody after the webinar is over. So I was able to find a report on Brown University's website about the preliminary results of Dr. Walker's study. So this was basically a study led by Dr. Erica Walker, who is an assistant professor of epidemiology at Brown University's School of Public Health, and it highlights the environmental health effects of wood pellet manufacturing on public health. The study concentrates on the emissions from the industry in the state of Mississippi, specifically noise, particulate matter, black carbon, ozone, nitrogen dioxide, and volatile organic compounds. Walker and her team point out that vulnerable populations and children in particular are impacted by air pollution emitted from wood pellet production. Proximity to these plants is associated with a statistically significant higher risk of hospitalization for respiratory illness and increased asthma-like symptoms in children. The preliminary findings of this study are the first air quality measurements taken in a Mississippi-based wood pellet impacted community. And they measured their results against air pollution monitoring campaign in another town in Mississippi, Mendenhall, with no current industrial activities. So some of the preliminary findings included that as compared to Mendenhall, the air pollution concentrations in Gloucester are magnitudes higher, even after adjusting for meteorological conditions. Pollution levels in Gloucester spiked at night, and the maximum level of air pollutants, especially particulate matter and total volatile organic compounds, is a cause for concern for the researchers. And on the noise issue, which we've heard about a lot from the panel as well, compared to background concentrations, the noise levels in Gloucester are 10 to 12 decibels higher, which represents a doubling of perceived loudness in that community. So as I said, unfortunately, Dr. Walker couldn't be with us here tonight, but hopefully we'll get more information that we can share with you all in the future. And with that, I will turn it back over to Adam.
All right. Thank you, Heather, and thank you, panel. And for those panelists and speakers, if you're, I know we're all off camera, but as we go through our question and answer here, I might call on you to address one of these questions. And so if you're here, you can jump on screen if I call on you to answer these. And to call out to those of you watching, if you have a question that you want us to get to, now's the time for that. We're going to take probably about, let me see here, we're going to probably take about 15 minutes or so to answer as many questions as we can. So first question, now I've lost it here. But first question, I have one here. It has why only big biomass? Here in Northwest California, many smaller projects seem just as threatening or devastating as many smaller projects seems just as threatening or devastating. And they give an example of like three smaller ones or a bunch of little smaller ones can equal something bigger. The scale of smaller local projects ramping up alongside the more well-known larger ones. So I'll take a stab at answering this. This is a great question, and I am also will make a pitch here too. If anybody else wants to jump in on the panel, Gloria, maybe if you know a little bit about this being on the West Coast, what I'll say is several different smaller projects can be, yes, just as impactful, particularly to the forests and the amount that they're taking. Here in the U.S. South, we're mainly familiar with these kind of like big, large facilities. So at least that's where my area of expertise. But yes, the death by 1,000 cuts, if you will, can be a big, big issue. And that has often been a tactic of the industry to build a lot of little smaller plants that can add up to a large amount of wood needed to maintain those. And so just as could be just as threatening in terms of like the number of smaller plants. What I would say to that answer specifically are there are incredible groups out in California and the West Coast that I see you're in Northwest California that are really working on that issue and our biomass. And I'll make a pitch at the end of this and a couple of the questions that we might not get to asked this. At the end of this, there is an action packet that's going out. Joy Reeves from the Rachel Carson Council is going to go over that right after the question and answer. But there in that packet has the contact information of groups across the country and many groups out west and in California. And so I know that those groups are going to have a much more detailed answer to that question. But in general, yeah, burning wood or pelletizing the wood can produce a lot of pollution. And so whether it's small or big, that's something that really needs to be paid attention to. Okay, so anybody else on the panel want to take a stab at that one? Okay. All right. Next question. And Crystal, I don't know if you can still hear, but this one you might talk about this one. It says in California, the excuse is cutting forests saves communities from wildfires, and they said not true. Do you say that? Did they say that in Mississippi too, or to any of other panelists? Is wildfires an argument that our communities are hearing in the U.S. South, or is it mainly just about jobs and economic development? Crystal, Treva, anybody want to talk about that?
It's mainly about jobs and economic development. About when they say trees, they say they see green, which is why our Public Service Commission went to told Georgia Power to add biomass to its Georgia Power, the Southern company, to add biomass to its plans, and decided to open up a biomass burner in the state that will be open in 2030. So it's that type of conversation and thinking that's digging us into a deep hole of the climate crisis and killing people right next door.
Yeah, you said it all, Dr. Gear. No, it's definitely not about wildfires in Mississippi. Yeah, it's all about profit. It's about profit in Mississippi, profit over people. The help of the people, they are in our community to definitely make a profit, and they are doing that. The promise of jobs is not going to the local communities. I don't know who the jobs go to. I just know the people in my community that look like me don't work in the facility. Well, they might have 5 people. Let me take that back.
No, they count the
And there's no
drivers.
economic investment. But
Log
no, no, they not. Yeah. Now the people that we talk to that working there, we do know some people who clean, but other than that, no. Only thing I can say about Drax in Mississippi is definitely about the profit, nothing else.
Yeah. Thank you all for that. I would say too that in general, there's another question I see here about the wildfire, fear of wildfire ramping up, the use of biomass. I think from a broader perspective, and from a kind of forest protection movement nationally, we are certainly, and definitely to our colleagues and all of you out west, there's organizations that are much more experts on the California and the Western situation with wildfires than we are at Dogwood. But I would say from a bigger picture perspective, we're certainly seeing the industrial logging industry and its allies, political allies, utilize the wildfire narrative to advance massive increases in logging across the country and use it to expand upon dirty and destructive industries like biomass, and use that narrative around wildfires in order to be able to do that. And one thing that we know is that older, mature forests are much more wildfire resilient, and there are lots more effective ways of reducing the risk to people and communities from wildfires, rather than just going in and increasing logging all across the forest. And so I would encourage you again to reach out to the groups who've worked with this webinar, I know that Pivot Point, who's on this, NRDC, several others that are working out west have a lot of really good information on that. Okay, let's see. Couple more questions here. All right, I've got one. Thank you. I'm getting sent these because it's hard to keep track. It says, I'm a river keeper in coastal South Carolina. Thank you for joining. There's a biomass power plant being proposed in Georgetown, South Carolina, on the banks of one of your rivers. The plant's taking over International Paper Wood Pellet Plant that recently closed. While there's less of a carbon footprint due to sourcing and utilizing locally, are the health impacts from these facilities to the surrounding environment typically the same as this we've heard tonight? And is it typically airborne pollution or the effluent discharge to rivers as well? Heather, I might call on you so I don't talk too much to answer this. Do you have an answer to this question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I tried to switch my speaker. I apologize to everyone for any of the audio problems. I swear it worked in the test beforehand.
It did work in the test. I will give you that. It worked well in the test. It's all good.
So I recently found out about the proposed conversion to a biomass power plant in Georgetown that you're talking about. So my understanding is that it's still a little bit unclear exactly what that facility is intended to be and how it's going to operate, which will impact a lot of things about the impact of the facility, including the air pollution. But assuming it is a biomass power plant that is burning some kind of woody biomass, which is what I'm hearing is the best assumption at this point, then yes, a lot of the impacts are going to be similar, although not exactly the same as much of what I talked about. Wood burning power plants are known to be also large sources of air pollutants, the same types of air pollutants as the pellet mills themselves. Obviously, they emit CO2 and GHGs in very large quantities, but they also emit a large amount of fine particulate matter and other toxic pollutants. Some toxic pollutants and fine particulate matter, PM2.5, in larger quantities than a coal facility. So yes, it will have a lot of harmful impacts on the local community, again, assuming that's what it is.
Great. Thank you, Heather. And feel free also to reach out again. I know I've said this several times, but there is information and contact information for the organizations involved. And to the Riverkeeper in South Carolina, again, thank you for joining, and we'd love to follow up with more specifics and information to be able to make you an informed decision. Okay, so I'm seeing another couple. I've seen this one a couple times about Drax and their violations and lawsuits. There is actually information about this in the action packet. There's some facts and figures on this. Drax, there was a study done in an article. Drax had violated their environmental permits over 11,000 times across their facilities, which is just mind-boggling how much. They've already been fined several times in Gloucester, but Crystal, I hate to put you on the spot one more time, but do you want to talk about kind of like what happens from a community perspective when Drax actually gets fined, or what happens when they break one of the permits? What's been your experience with that?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting experience. The most recent fine that Drax received, did it occur over a year ago? I think Drax, it took over 1 year. It took over 1 year for them to come to a settlement on that fine, on that violation. Yeah, it took a really long time. We were not included. The community was not included in the conversation. However, we do know that there was conversation. Like, they got a chance to negotiate their fine with MDEQ, and that's crazy. Drax has multiple violations, like multiple violations. Not all of the violations netted a fine, but the most recent one, I think it came with 3 or 4 violations, but some of the violations received a warning letter, and the one that resulted in a fine, they negotiated the fine. So I don't know how you get to negotiate a fine after you've have like multiple, and I mean a lot of violations. So for us as a community, we pushed back, we fought back. We didn't get to have our voices heard during the negotiations, but we definitely let them know, MDEQ, how we felt about the decision that was made. And then let me kind of fast forward. They received a fine, I think, of $250,000, maybe $75,000. They asked them to invest in a dust screen. And baby, all I can tell you, if you see that dust screen that they just put up about 3 weeks ago, now this is from relation from 20, you have to help me because I might be wrong. It's a violation from 2023 or 2022. But anyway, they just put up the dust screen maybe about 3 weeks ago, and the dust screen looked like something you could buy at Walmart.
I think Crystal's connection lost, but that was a perfect way to end. Um, uh, uh, with how Drax handles their violations. So thank you, Crystal. All right, I'm going to answer one more here. I'm sorry we didn't get to the to all. There was a lot of comments in here too, which we are capturing and appreciate. Last one, I got a lot of love for the river keepers tonight. So I'm a river keeper in the Pacific Northwest. And thank you for joining. The biomass industry has long been driven by deceptive climate accounting that treats burning trees as carbon neutral. Correct. I'm adding to that. Despite science showing it emits more carbon than coal, given this administration's climate commitments, how can we address the loopholes and subsidies that allow biomass to be portrayed as clean energy? And how can we ensure that communities, especially rural and indigenous communities, are protected from the health and environmental harms caused by biomass facilities? Well, Juan, thank you so much for writing that question. That is a big question. And what I would say generally is there are a lot of loopholes in which the biomass industry takes advantage of. Whether it's being considered a clean or renewable energy and therefore available to subsidies in Europe or through climate subsidies here in the US. I would say though that at the core, I think there are a couple different ways. Is that a lot of the subsidies that at least here in the United States that the bioenergy receives are from actually a local and a state level. And so if you are in a state like Washington or Oregon, not Oregon, Washington or California or Mississippi or Alabama or North Carolina that has biomass facilities that are either expanding or new facilities that are proposed, it is really, really important that you make your voice heard to your local and state level leaders that this is not an industry that you want to see subsidized. Also, at a federal level, it's really important that we educate our elected officials about this industry and ensuring that that those loopholes get closed and that there isn't political support for subsidies for biomass to go through and kind of be clumped in with efforts to increase renewable energy or climate change. And so biomass, what happens is it often gets clumped in with the true renewables like wind and solar, and biomass gets tagged along with that. And so it's really important that we educate our elected officials. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Joy Reeves from Rachel Carson Council, who's going to give our call to action and tell everybody about the action packet, which will give you ways to take action and do just that.
Thank you so much, Adam. Good evening, everyone. My name is Joy Reeves, and I'm the Director of Policy and Strategic Development at the Rachel Carson Council. The Rachel Carson Council is a national environmental justice organization based in Washington, D.C., formed in the legacy of Rachel Carson after she passed away in the 1960s. And some of our focus areas are environmental justice, clean energy, anti-pesticides, of course, and wood pellets. So why wood pellets for us? This issue caught our attention because wood pellets are a false solution, and Rachel Carson herself was opposed to false solutions, especially pesticides, pledging to fix our agricultural system when they actually have made it much worse. And our organization is based in Washington, D.C., so we really try to approach the wood pellets issue from the perspective of how can we advocate with members of Congress and their staff and their offices and really try to change minds on this particular issue. And we just had a great national forum on the 28th featuring support from Representative Valerie Foushee, Senator Chris Van Hollen, and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse with incredible panelists. So thank you all so much for attending this webinar. It's incredible to see over 200 on the webinar, and I know a lot of online watch parties are happening. And this is the night of the NCAA championship basketball game, so thank you for being here. And thanks to Dogwood and Break Big Biomass Coalition partners for making this happen. We've heard some incredible stories from our panels tonight. And if you're like me, you might be thinking, okay, so why is now the time to act on biomass in this time of incredible uncertainty towards the state of the government and funding and where the country is headed? Why is now the time to act? And I think we know, even amid this uncertainty, that this administration does want to push forward logging and does want to roll back protections for environmental justice communities. And with both of those things in mind, now is our chance to change the narrative and to pursue really strong educational actions, as our community panelists emphasized. I'm surprised on the Hill how many policymakers have no idea what biomass is, and we have to offer 101s on the subject. And then I'm surprised how many are flexible and willing to change their perspectives and change their minds on what they thought was as clean as solar and wind. Now is the time for action. We have witnessed a bankruptcy from Enviva. We have called out violations and delayed permits thanks to the tireless efforts of community members. We have seen facilities close, operational costs rise, and machinery get old. We've heard from whistleblower employees at Enviva that the clean green angle is a lie. But the industry is prepping for major expansion, and we have the opportunity to stop Enviva and Drax in their tracks. And to make that easy, as Adam mentioned, there's an amazing action packet that Dogwood and partner organizations have put together and will be sent out to all participants in the chat and I think via email afterwards. So the packet gives an overview of the biomass industry and transitions into a really great section called Biomass by the Numbers that offers some data-driven talking points, including how long it takes to replant trees in order for them to, replenish the carbon that's lost by cutting them down. There's also a taking action section with both national and local opportunities to get involved on this issue. Local opportunities span Alabama, British Columbia, California, Georgia, Mississippi, the Carolinas, Washington, and Oregon. And I think later on in the chat, Heidi will share the website once again, nobigbiomasspnw.org, for everyone to check out. Next in the packet, there's a great section called Follow These Organizations, offering a list of organizations working on biomass that you can get involved with. And then also a series of sample social media posts across Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, #BreakBigBiomass. Finally, the template includes how to write letters to the editor templates, as well as maps and other resources, including organizing guides. So with all of these tools in our toolbox, it's time for us to take action together to stop Enviva and Drax. So I challenge everyone on this call to take 5 minutes tonight and do one action from the action packet, whether that's a social media post, whether that's connecting with an organization in your region, or whether that's participating in a national initiative listed in the packet. And maybe it's also a personal commitment to be annoying and bring biomass into every clean energy conversation whenever you can. I took biomass conversations with me to COP28 and tried to call out European parliamentarians for supporting biomass supply chains. And it's always great to hear from activists and youth internationally on this issue. I also encourage you to share the packet with 5 people in your network. This is an issue that needs to be talked about more. And in spite of the obstacles that all of us face, there's a lot of hope in the sense that our advocacy is international, our advocacy is intergenerational. I'm a young person myself, and I see this issue creeping into youth conversations around clean energy and social media finally. And I think in this moment of uncertainty, we also all have logic on our side. We don't have time for biomass. We don't have time for that kind of carbon debt with our goals and with Europe's goals for clean energy directives. And even if we just delay this industry, that is progress enough to buy our climate more time. So I'm going to end with a quick quote from C.S. Lewis that I always bring up in the context of biomass. Paraphrasing, when you're headed down the wrong road, the most progressive thing you can do is turn back. So thank you to each and every one of you for being here tonight, showing up, and daring to take that crucial progressive first step back away from biomass. Let's capitalize on this moment, get out there and break big biomass together. Thank you, and back to you, Adam.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. I cannot top that. Thank you, Joy. Thank you to our panelists, and for everybody that took time out of your busy schedules and lives to attend tonight. We are so grateful. The action packet is posted in the chat. You will also get a follow-up email with that packet. So thank you for attending. Please take action and have a great night. Goodbye, everybody.